All right, Hokie Nation, jumping on here for a super quick, probably 15 to 20 minutes to talk through the various selection shows that took place last night. Um, the men's side was at 6 o'clock. Obviously, the Hokies are not going to be in the big dance this year, but then the women's selection show was right after that at 8, followed up by the NIT selection show at 9:30, which does have some Virginia Tech implications. So we'll start out with the women's bracket. The general consensus on the women's team coming into Selection Sunday was that they would end up on that 4 line. Thankfully, that was the case. Virginia Tech finished on the 4 line, which means they're hosting games in Blacksburg, which is going to be an awesome environment for everybody in town next weekend. The first game is on Friday against Marshall. So the 4 versus 13 matchup, Virginia Tech versus Marshall. Not a super far trip for the Thundering Herd, so I expect them to have a pretty good turnout in Castle as well. But that's an interesting matchup for Virginia Tech. So, per ESPN's metrics, Virginia Tech has a 95% chance of winning their first round game against Marshall. Obviously, I don't really know if that has the status of Liz Kitley baked into it, which has huge implications on everything Virginia Tech wants to do. Her status is still up in the air based on Coach Brooks's press conference last night. But overall, don't really expect her to play in this game. But the 4 seed versus the 13 seed, Marshall doesn't have a single player over 6'1". That's going to have a huge impact on this game. I expect a lot from Claire Strack and Rose Michaud. I mean, Karis Baker's taller than 6'1". So Virginia Tech is going to have a distinct size advantage in this first round matchup. What Marshall lacks in size, they make up for in speed and quickness. They press a lot. They press the entire game. So it's not something Virginia Tech hasn't seen before. Coach Brooks talked about this on his press conference last night. Miami presses, Duke presses. It's stuff we've seen in the ACC. But Marshall does it, and they do it all. They do it all the time. They are a speed-based team. They don't have any size at all. So taking care of the ball is going to be really important. Not making this just a Georgia Amore break the press by yourself game will be huge for Virginia Tech. Get Carly Wenzel involved, make good decisions with Kayla King, Matilda Ack, and breaking the press is, that will probably decide this game from Virginia Tech standpoint, because once we get into the half court offense, we'll be able to run through the post, through Rose Michaud, through Claire Strack, and obviously, through Georgia Amore setting it all up. But it's a very interesting matchup from that perspective because Marshall's just really short. I mean, the tallest player being 6'1" doesn't really present much of an opposition for Claire Strack on the inside. So I expect to see a lot of sets that are reminiscent of Liz Kitley type sets, where you're getting Claire the ball in the block in that little mid-range area and letting her go to work and instill some confidence against some smaller defenders. So I'm looking forward to watching that matchup and kind of somewhat a clashing of styles. I still expect, everything to start and end with Georgia Amore in terms of breaking the press, getting into the sets, and then Georgia going to work. She's going to be able to get all the way to the basket and not have to deal with much in terms of size and shot blocking once she does get there. So expect a big game out of her as well. A couple other things I'll be kind of keeping an eye on for this game will be how are we able to get Kayla King going? How are we able to get Matilda Eck going? Can we get Carly Wenzel going in some, on-ball situations, getting her downhill towards the rim and making decisions and playmaking? These are the things that I'm kind of going to be keeping an eye on, because if Virginia Tech is able to get past Marshall, which I expect them to do regardless of the status of Liz Kitley, I think Virginia Tech should be able to get by this Marshall team, especially in Castle Coliseum. They will then run into most likely the 5 seed Baylor, if Baylor is able to take care of things on their end. At the time of this recording, we don't know who Baylor's playing yet. They have one of those playing games to decide who will be playing against the 5 seed Baylor Bears. Baylor looks much more like a Virginia Tech, an ACC, a Power 5 school, right? When you look at their roster, they've got a freshman as tall as 6'7". They've got athletes. This is a good team. It's a really good program historically. But Baylor, you finished the year 24-7. Some comparable matchups that Baylor had, or opponents that we had and Baylor had, was Kansas. We beat Kansas early in the year in non-conference. Baylor actually lost to Kansas. So that'll be an interesting matchup for Virginia Tech. It'll be much more Power 5 basketball-esque in terms of the style of play and the level of athlete that is on the other side. So I would really hope we are able to find a way to get the really, really talented freshmen in Carly Wenzel, Karis Baker, Claire Strack, all up to speed quickly and get them involved and capitalizing on some of their high talent levels in this 10 days off. I'm sure that was a huge area of emphasis, was getting all those girls really comfortable, getting them up to speed, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. If we get the opportunity to play against Baylor, but from there, if Virginia Tech is able to get that win against Baylor, a historic program in women's college basketball, they would then go on to play the 1 seed in their region, which is Southern California. So there's 2 USCs as 1 seed, South Carolina and Southern California. We were able to avoid South Carolina, which I was very happy to see. But the consolation for that is you're running to a really good USC team out on the West Coast. And Juju Watkins, who, is probably the freshman of the year in the country. Juju Watkins is currently averaging 27, 7 rebounds, 3 assists on 40% shooting. Really, really high volume shooter, but making them at a good clip as well. When I talked to Pete from the 2 Deep podcast, we did a live recording last week, and we talked about potential matchups and what 1 seeds we might run into. My hope was Iowa or USC, because I didn't want to run into a team that has really, really strong interior presence, like a Stanford with Cameron Brink, or like a South Carolina with they're good, period, but their front court and back court are both really good. Because you don't know the status of Liz, and if Liz is out, I just didn't want to have to deal with running into a front court dominant team. With Juju Watkins, you think it's kind of similar to Caitlin Clark, right? Everything runs through Juju Watkins the way everything runs through Caitlin Clark on the Iowa side of things. So, that matchup would present a lot of challenges because Juju Watkins is an incredible player, and everybody around her supporting cast is very good as well. But I like the idea of going against a more guard-centric team than going against more of a front court-centric team, with the status of Liz Kitley being up in the air. That game would take place out in Portland, so the Hokies would be flying across the country again, just like they did last year when they went to Seattle for the Sweet 16. But again, it's not the easiest draw in Blacksburg. Marshall can present some problems. Again, I do expect us to get by them. Baylor, though, is a very legitimate team coming into Blacksburg, and that's going to be a tough game. That game would be on Sunday, assuming the Hokies take care of business against Marshall. But you got, playing Baylor for a chance to get to the Sweet 16 and playing the number 1 seed in USC. Everything's still in front of you, but the path is definitely tricky, and navigating that path without Liz Kitley is obviously something that will present a lot of challenges. So overall, I was pretty pleased with the draw. I was really happy to see we didn't fall off the 4 line, and we are able to host games as this team deserves. The ACC regular season champ absolutely deserves to host games in their own building, regardless of what has happened, since that ACC regular season title was wrapped up. A team with our resume, no question, should be hosting games. So I was really glad to see that the committee didn't punish Virginia Tech for, what we all assume is Liz Kitley's injury, keeping her out. But we'll see. Coach Brooks was non-committal about her status, and we'll see what happens. But again, expectation is she probably will not be playing. I guess from there, we'll jump over to the men. So tough year for the men. Lost to Florida State in DC in their first game of the ACC tournament. I went to that game. I thought Virginia Tech played a really good first half. Tyler Nickel and MJ Collins were really good throughout the night, and they fell short in the second half. Just got dominated in the second half physically. Didn't get a whole lot out of the center spot, and the combination of Kidd and Poteet, a place we've kind of hang our hat on all year. We weren't able to get much in the way of production out of that spot. Robbie Barron was in foul trouble for most of the night. Made life really difficult on the interior for the Hokies defensively. Florida State kind of got downhill pretty much at will and was able to score in bunches in the second half. And I thought the Hokies got some really good looks, but nothing was able to fall, and as a result, they went home. So they finished the year 18-13 in the regular season, 10-10 in conference, and then obviously a first-round exit in the ACC tournament. And that firmly gets you into a place where you're hosting a first-round game of the NIT. Now, I believe technically the way the NIT works, if Pitt had decided to accept their bid, Virginia Tech would not have been hosting a game. We still would have been in the field, but we wouldn't have been hosting a game. So Pitt opting out, which, I'll just say it, is, in my opinion, loser mentality. Not deciding to not continue to play games. Questionable move by Jeff Capel, but whatever. Allowed Virginia Tech to host the game. So the Hokies play tomorrow night, the 19th at 9:30 p.m. on ESPN2 against Richmond. So in-state game, Richmond coming across, driving 3 hours over to Blacksburg to play the Hokies. And Richmond's a really good team. Richmond's a really good team. They finished the year really, really strong. It's a tough matchup, in-state game in the postseason. I kind of don't love that, but Richmond finished their last 5 games going 3-2. Their loss being to St. Joseph's in the A10 tournament. They're kind of led by Jordan King. Jordan King averages 18 points a game, kind of from the point guard spot. So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch him and Sean Padula go against each other. 2 really dynamic guards who can score in bunches. I expect a really fun game in Blacksburg on Tuesday. And at the moment, the ESPN matchup predictor has the Hokies with a 75% chance of winning this one. The spread is currently Virginia Tech -5 or -5.5. So I really hope that the Virginia Tech students, Virginia Tech fan base down there in Blacksburg are able to pack out Castle for a fun in-state postseason game in the NIT first round. I'm, optimistic that Virginia Tech will have their full roster, because to date, or to this point, as we sit right before 2:00 East Coast time on Monday, there hasn't been any news of any opt-outs from a Virginia Tech perspective, and guys jumping in the portal. That hasn't happened yet. So it appears that everyone who's on the roster and who we've seen all year will be playing in this game, which is exciting. I'm going to continue to look at Tyler Nickel and MJ Collins and watch their growth, because over the end of the season, really the last month, those guys have been awesome. Tyler Nickel continues to get more and more comfortable, particularly going downhill, getting to the rim, finishing around contact. And MJ Collins' mid-range game and his passing has been really, really good the last few weeks for Virginia Tech. So looking forward to watching those guys continue to play. I expect a big one out of Hunter Couture, his potential probable last game in Castle Coliseum. He hasn't shot the ball particularly well the last couple of weeks, and I don't expect that to continue. That guy's too good of a shooter to shoot poorly for a long stretch. So looking forward to watching him play in Castle, likely one last time. Now, there's a chance if Virginia Tech's able to get by Richmond and Cornell upsets Ohio State that we would get another game in Castle. Pretty unlikely, though, because Ohio State's a good team. Expect them to hold serve and win against Cornell, and then the Hokies would then be traveling up to Columbus to play the Buckeyes. So interesting year for the Buckeyes. They fired their coach. Assistant gets promoted with the interim tag. They go on a run, almost make the NCAA tournament, and then they hire their assistant coach. They remove the interim tag and give him a 5-year deal. So interesting year for the Ohio State Buckeyes in what could be an eventual matchup between Virginia Tech and Ohio State up in Columbus. So as the portal progresses, Mike and I will continue to jump back on and give updates, as it feels necessary. To date, the only Virginia Tech player who's entered the transfer portal is Rodney Rice, which, doesn't even really count. He hasn't been with the program in 5 months now. So I don't even count that one. But, as players come and go, which we expect some attrition, I should say. I mean, obviously you have to replace guys like Mekhi Long and Robbie Barron and Hunter Couture, but I anticipate there'll probably be a couple of guys who transfer, and, plenty of new faces in Blacksburg next year for Mike Young's bunch. And as those guys come into the fold, we'll come on here and introduce them to the fan base. So just wanted to give a quick 15 minutes here to get everyone up to speed, get everyone fired up for the women's team, and watch them potentially go on another run into the second weekend and beyond. Some intriguing matchups for both the men and the women. I think the Richmond matchup for the men will be really interesting, and I'm excited to watch that one. And then, of course, Coach Brooks's crew, I think they play at 3:30 on Friday. So, everyone get all your work done before the afternoon on Friday so you can relax and watch this team play Marshall, and then, eventually, hopefully, Baylor on Sunday. I got nothing else. quick 15 minutes for everybody. Go Hokies.